December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest, 0530 hours. The silence of the Ghost Front is not broken by a whisper, but by the roar of 2,000 German guns. For the sentries of the American 106th Golden Lions Division, the world simply dissolves. The ground liquefies. Trees shatter into jagged shrapnel. From the perspective of the German High Command Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, this is not a battle, it is an execution. Field Marshal Walter Model, watching from his command bunker, believes the logic is flawless. The American alliance is fragile. Their supply lines are overextended. Their morale, according to Berlin's intelligence, is crumbling under the weight of a stagnant winter. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, is a masterpiece of deception. Under the cover of heavy mist and absolute radio silence, the Third Reich has assembled the largest armoured force seen on the Western Front since the invasion of France. 250,000 men, nearly 1,000 tanks. The objective is simple: punch through the thinly held American centre, cross the Meuse River, seize the port of Antwerp, and split the British and American armies in two. It is a gamble. But to the German officers staring at their maps, it looks like a checkmate. They are employing the very tactic that destroyed the French in 1940 and decimated the Soviets in 1941, the Blitzkrieg, massed armour. Overwhelming force concentrated at a single weak point. For the first 48 hours, the reality matches the map. The American lines buckle. Panzer columns, led by the fearsome King Tiger tanks, tear through the snow. The confusion on the Allied side is absolute. American units are cut off, surrendering in the thousands. General Eisenhower's headquarters is in chaos, scrambling to understand if this is a local skirmish or a full-scale offensive. To the German tank commanders, peering through the fog, the Americans appear soft, disorganized, and terrified. But on the morning of December 19, 72 hours into the offensive, a strange report reaches the desk of General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army. It is a reconnaissance report, fragmented and confusing. It does not concern the American troops in front of them, the ones fleeing or dying in the snow. It concerns the sector to the south. German intelligence had been absolute on one specific fact. The American Third Army, commanded by the flamboyant General George S. Patton, was heavily engaged in the Saar region, over 100 miles to the south. The Germans knew Patton's doctrine. They knew his logistics. To disengage an entire army of 250,000 men, turn them 90 degrees, and march them north through a blizzard to reinforce the Ardennes would take a minimum of 96 hours. Even then, they would arrive exhausted and without fuel. It was a logistical impossibility. No army in the history of warfare, from the Romans to the Soviets, could execute a maneuver of that magnitude in winter conditions in less than 4 days. Therefore, the German southern flank was left relatively light, guarded by a calculated assumption: Patton was stuck. Yet, the report on Manteuffel's desk contradicts the laws of physics. A German patrol near the town of Arlon reports contact, not with a chaotic retreat and not with a light scouting force. They report engaging a heavy armoured column moving with terrifying speed. They identify the distinct high-velocity crack of 76mm guns. They hear the engines of Sherman tanks. Manteuffel stares at the map. If this report is true, the Americans are not just reacting, they are doing something that defies the operational capacity of a modern military. The Germans are fighting a war of mass and tonnage, moving their heavy Tiger tanks like chess pieces. They assume the Americans are doing the same. But the enemy to the south is not behaving like a standard army. It is moving like a fluid. Confusion begins to ripple through the German command structure. They dismiss the report as an error. Perhaps it is a stray unit. Perhaps it is a ghost signal. Because if it is real, if General Patton has somehow rotated an entire army corps in 48 hours and is driving them straight into the German flank, then the entire premise of the offensive is wrong. The Germans believe they are fighting a war of attrition against a merchant nation. They do not realize they are about to collide with a new kind of warfare, entirely one that prioritizes speed over armor and logistics over firepower. The mist hangs heavy over the battlefield, obscuring the truth. The German panzers press forward toward the Meuse, eyes fixed on the horizon, unaware that the hunter has already become the hunted. The trap has been sprung, but not the one Hitler designed. Before we unravel the mystery of this impossible maneuver and how it set the stage for the next 40 years of global conflict, make sure you are subscribed to Cold War Impact. we decode the hidden history of the wars that shaped our world. Back in the command bunker, the reports multiply. It is no longer just one patrol, it is 5, then 10. A radio intercept picks up American chatter. It is disciplined, it is aggressive, and it is coming from the one direction where the Germans felt safe. The question haunts the German strategists. How? How can an army move that fast? Is it a trick? Or have the Americans developed a capability that the Wehrmacht and their observers in Moscow cannot comprehend? The snow continues to fall, burying the dead, but it cannot bury the rising panic that something is moving in the whiteout, something impossible. December 21st, 1944. The salient is deepening, but the momentum is dying. To understand the mystery unfolding in the frozen Ardennes, we must look through the slit of a periscope inside a Panzer VI Tiger II, the legendary King Tiger. From a purely technical standpoint, this machine is the apex of armored warfare. It boasts almost 7 inches of sloped frontal armor. Its 88mm gun can vaporize any Allied vehicle from 2 kilometers away. It is, on paper, invulnerable. It is the embodiment of the philosophy that Hitler and Stalin both subscribed to: superior size equals superior dominance. But inside the cockpit of Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper's lead column near the town of La Glaise, the reality is a claustrophobic nightmare. The German advance has stalled, not because of enemy fire, but because of the roads. The Ardennes is a labyrinth of narrow, winding tracks cut into hillsides. The King Tiger weighs nearly 70 tons. It is a beast designed for the open steppes of Russia, not the cow paths of Belgium. As the column tries to maneuver, the massive tanks churn the road into a slurry of ice and mud. Bridges collapse under their weight. Transmissions, stressed by the constant shifting required on the twisty roads, begin to shear. The superior weapon is trapping itself. Peiper is furious. His orders are to race to the Meuse, but he is crawling, and he is watching a terrifying phenomenon unfold. The Americans, retreating in their M4 Sherman tanks, are moving freely. The Sherman is lighter, considered inferior, with thinner armor and a smaller gun. Yet, on these roads, the Sherman tanks are dancing while the Tigers are stumbling. But the tactical frustration on the ground pales in comparison to the strategic panic rising in the headquarters. The German plan relied on capturing Allied fuel dumps. They calculated that the American logistics would be chaotic, leaving vast stockpiles unguarded in the panic. It was a reasonable assumption. In 1940, the French supply lines had collapsed instantly under pressure. However, as Peiper's scouts reach the designated fuel depots near Stavelot and Trois Ponts, they find nothing but scorched earth. The Americans are burning millions of gallons of gasoline rather than letting it fall into German hands. This confuses the German analysts. Destroying your own supplies requires a terrifying level of discipline and a reckless confidence that you can simply replace them. For the Germans, fuel is liquid gold. Every drop is rationed. To see the enemy lighting rivers of gasoline on fire suggests a terrifying truth. The Americans do not care about waste. They have so much, they can afford to burn it. And then, the Southern Mystery returns with a vengeance. General Patton's movement is no longer a rumor. It is a physical force slamming into the German 7th Army, which was supposed to be the quiet flank guarding the main thrust. Reports flood into Field Marshal Model's bunker, detailing a ferocity of fire that makes no sense. The German infantry dug into the snowy hillsides are experiencing artillery barrages of unprecedented coordination. Usually, artillery requires time to adjust. A spotter calls a shot, the gun fires, they adjust and fire again. It is a slow, rhythmic process. But the soldiers facing Patton's sudden advance report something different. They are being hit by time-on-target missions. One moment, there is silence. The next, a dozen shells from a dozen different batteries fired from miles apart impact a single coordinate at the exact same split second. The math required to coordinate this, calculating the flight time of different shells from different distances to arrive simultaneously, is complex. To do it while an entire army is supposedly in the middle of a frantic relocation is impossible. It implies a communication network that the Germans cannot visualize. By December 22nd, the siege of Bastogne becomes the focal point of the confusion. The town is a critical road hub. If the Germans cannot take Bastogne, they cannot move their supplies to the front. They have the town surrounded. Inside, The American 101st Airborne Division is cut off, freezing, and low on ammunition. The German commander sends a surrender ultimatum, expecting the Americans to capitulate. Logic dictates they must. They are outnumbered 5-1. They have no heavy armor support. They are trapped in a pocket. The American reply consists of a single word: nuts. The German translators are baffled. Is it a code? A distinctive negation? But the confusion turns to dread as the battle for Bastogne intensifies. The Americans inside are not fighting like trapped men. They are holding the perimeter with a savage efficiency. And critically, despite being cut off, they are not starving. Through the gaps in the cloud cover, C-47 transport aircraft begin to appear. They drop tons of supplies directly into the pocket. The Germans watch as the encirclement strategy, the very tactic that destroyed the German 6th Army at Stalingrad, fails to crush the Americans. The German High Command begins to ask the question that will define the rest of the century. What is the point of having the biggest tank, the heaviest gun, or the most brilliant tactical plan if the enemy can simply rewrite the laws of supply and demand? The King Tigers sit idling, their fuel gauges dropping to zero. They are the most powerful land weapons on Earth, and they are turning into 69-ton paperweights. The crews look to the sky, praying the heavy fog holds. Because if the weather clears, if the impossible American logistics machine can connect with their air power, the mystery of the American advance will be solved by fire. But the Germans still have one card left to play. They believe the American resolve is brittle. They believe that if they can just crack one sector, the whole alliance will fall apart. They prepare for one final, desperate heave towards the Meuse. They do not realize that the inferior American tanks rushing to meet them are not coming to hold the line. They are coming to encircle the encirclers. The stage is set for the collision of two eras. The era of the heavy tank, the slow giant, is dying in the snow. Something faster, leaner, and infinitely more dangerous is being born. December 23, 1944. The meteorological miracle. For 7 days, the heavy low-pressure system hanging over the Ardennes has been the Third Reich's greatest ally. The thick, freezing fog grounded the Allied air forces, stripping the Americans of their greatest advantage. It allowed the heavy German panzer columns to move with impunity, shielded from the eyes of the hawks circling above. But at dawn on the 23rd, the prayers of General Patton are answered, and the hopes of Field Marshal Model turn to ash. A high-pressure ridge, drifting in from the east ironically, from Russia sweeps the skies clean. The grey ceiling lifts. For the German soldier shivering in a foxhole near the town of Foy, the sun is not a sign of warmth, it is a death sentence. The twist in this battle is not a maneuver on the ground, it is the sudden, vertical expansion of the battlefield. Within hours, the sky is black with aircraft. Not tens, not hundreds, but thousands. C-47 transport aircraft stream over Bastogne like a conveyor belt, dropping parabundles of ammunition and medical supplies, finally breaking the siege's strangulation. But it is the fighter bombers, the P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft and the Hawker Typhoon aircraft that bring the true terror. German tank commanders, who days ago felt invincible inside their King Tigers, now realize a fatal flaw in their design. The Tiger is a predator on the horizontal plane. Against another tank, it is a king. But against a P-47 Thunderbolt diving at 400 miles per hour, armed with 5-inch high-velocity rockets and 500-pound bombs, the King Tiger is just a large, slow metal coffin. The roads, already clogged with mud and broken vehicles, become slaughterhouses. The German columns cannot move during the day. They are forced to hide in the forests, camouflaging their white-painted tanks with pine boughs. The offensive momentum does not just stop, it evaporates. But the thrill of this phase and the deepest confusion for the German survivors comes from a new horror on the ground. As Patton's 4th Armoured Division smashes into the southern flank to relieve Bastogne, the German infantry dug in to stop them experience a type of artillery fire that defies their understanding of ballistics. Standard artillery relies on impact or mechanical timers. A shell hits the ground and explodes, sending shrapnel upward and outward. If a soldier is in a foxhole or lying flat, they are relatively safe unless it is a direct hit. Timed fuses can burst in the air, but setting them requires precise calculation of range and flight time, a slow, difficult process, especially against moving targets. Yet, as the German grenadiers try to hold the line south of Bastogne, They are decimated by shells that seem to possess intelligence. These American shells do not hit the ground. They explode exactly 20 to 30 feet above the heads of the German troops, raining shrapnel downward into the foxholes. And they do this with 100% consistency. There are no ranging shots. There is no pause for calculation. The American batteries fire, and every single round bursts at the perfect lethal height. To the German veterans on the receiving end, this is sorcery. How can a mechanical fuse know exactly when it is 20 feet above the snow? The terrain is uneven. The hills roll. A mechanical timer set for one elevation would bury itself in a hill or explode too high over a valley. But these shells adapt instantly to the terrain below them. Panic spreads through the German lines. The foxhole, the infantryman's sanctuary since World War I, is suddenly obsolete. There is nowhere to hide. Simultaneously, the strategic trap snaps shut near the town of Celle, just a few miles from the Meuse River. The 2nd Panzer Division, the spearhead of the German advance, has finally run out of fuel. They can see the river. It is right there, but their tanks are dry. They wait for the supplies that were promised. But the supplies never come, because back down the line, the P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft have destroyed the horse-drawn wagons and the Opel Blitz trucks carrying the gasoline. General Manteuffel begs Berlin for permission to retreat to save his elite armored divisions while they still exist. Hitler refuses. The order is hold. This refusal creates a killing bowl. The Americans are not just pushing the Germans back, they are methodically disassembling the Wehrmacht's ability to wage war. On December 26, the inevitable happens. A Sherman tank named Cobra King, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess, breaks through the German encirclement and shakes hands with the defenders of Bastogne. The siege is broken. The bulge is pierced. But as the Germans pull back, leaving their precious heavy equipment behind, they witness a final, baffling sight that shakes their faith in their own technological superiority. They pass abandoned American positions. They see American tanks that had been knocked out days earlier, but the tanks are gone. The Americans possess specialized recovery vehicles, the M32 tank recovery vehicles, that drag damaged tanks off the field immediately. They have mobile repair depots operating just behind the front lines. A Sherman tank with a blown engine or a shattered track is not abandoned. It is fixed in 24 hours and sent back into the fight. The Germans, by contrast, are forced to blow up their own King Tigers when they run out of fuel or break a track, because they have no heavy recovery vehicles capable of moving them and no spare parts to fix them. The mystery deepens for the retreating enemy. They are fighting a Hydra. For every tank they destroy, 2 return. For every soldier they kill, 10 more arrive, fully fed and warm. The German soldier is fighting on empty calories and methamphetamine. The American soldier is fighting on steak and chocolate. The battle is technically won, but the shock is yet to come. The Germans believe they lost because of the weather or the fuel shortage or the sheer number of Americans. They are missing the invisible revolution that made it all possible. They do not know that the shells bursting over their heads contain a secret so sensitive that American commanders were forbidden from using it over land until this very battle, for fear the Germans would capture a dud and copy it. As the smoke clears over the Ardennes, the true architect of the victory is revealed not to be a general, but a device no larger than a milk bottle. The mystery of the intelligent shelling that decimated the German infantry south of Bastogne is solved not in a laboratory in 1945, but in a muddy crater outside the village of Chaumont on December 27, 1944. A German intelligence officer, sifting through the aftermath of an American barrage, finds a shell that failed to detonate. It is a 105mm howitzer round, but the nose cone is different. It does not have the standard metallic, adjustable time ring that every army in the world, including the Wehrmacht, uses to set airbursts. Instead, the nose is a molded piece of plastic-like composite. He unscrews it. Inside, he does not find a clockwork mechanism. He finds glass. He is looking at a miniaturized radio transmitter and receiver powered by a wet cell battery that activates only when the violent spin of the shell breaks a glass ampule of electrolyte. This is the VT fuse, or variable time fuse, specifically the T132 model. This is the shock that the German High Command could not comprehend. For 5 years, the Germans had believed they were the masters of technology. They had the V-2 rocket, the first ballistic missile. They had the Me-262, the first jet fighter. But these were macro technologies, huge, expensive, and finicky. What the Americans had done was infinitely harder and infinitely more dangerous. They had squeezed a complete radar station into the nose of an artillery shell. The device worked on the Doppler effect. As the shell plummeted towards the Earth, the nose cone transmitted a continuous radio signal. When the signal bounced off the ground or a tank or a tree and returned to the receiver, the frequency shifted. When the shell sensed it was exactly 20 feet from the solid object, it triggered the detonator. It required no math from the gunners. It required no spotters to adjust the timing. You simply pointed the gun at the grid square and fired. The shell did the rest. The reason the Germans had never seen it before and why American commanders were terrified to use it was fear of reverse engineering. General Eisenhower had strictly forbidden the use of VT fuses over land. They were only used by the Navy in the Pacific to shoot down Japanese aircraft or over the English Channel to stop V-1 flying bombs. The risk that the Germans might recover a dud and learn the secret was considered too high. But during the Battle of the Bulge, faced with the potential collapse of the Western Front, Eisenhower authorized the release. The result was a massacre. The impossible accuracy that terrified the Germans was actually the first deployment of smart weapon technology in human history. It proved that in the coming age of warfare, electronic superiority would matter more than the caliber of the gun. The tank paradox. Why the T-34 philosophy failed. This revelation brings us to the second, deeper mystery, the failure of the German armor. The title of this story references the obsolescence of the T-34. To understand this, we must look at what the German Panther tank actually was. After encountering the Soviet T-34 tanks in 1941, the Germans were traumatized. The T-34 had sloped armor and wide tracks. It was a masterpiece of rough, rugged engineering. In response, Hitler ordered the creation of the Panther, Panzer IV. The Panther was a direct high-tech copy of the T-34's principles, but over-engineered with German precision. It was heavier, possessed a better gun, and had thicker armor than the American Sherman. On paper, the Battle of the Bulge should have been a shooting gallery. The Panther and Tiger tanks were superior to the Sherman in every statistical category: range, penetration, and protection. So, why did they lose? The Battle of the Bulge revealed a startling truth that would define the Cold War. The best tank is not the one with the biggest gun. The best tank is the one that actually works. The German Panthers and Tigers were plagued by their own complexity. Their overlapping road wheels, designed to distribute weight, froze solid in the mud and snow. Their transmissions, designed for precise maneuvering, shattered under the stress of the Ardennes hills. The superior German tanks knocked themselves out of the war faster than the Americans could destroy them. Conversely, the American M4 Sherman was often mocked as a Ronson lighter, lights up every time, because of its tendency to burn. But the Sherman had a secret weapon: standardization and logistics. During the battle, for every Sherman tank the Germans destroyed, the American Red Ball Express trucking system brought 2 more to the front. But more importantly, the Sherman had the M34 gun mount and a gyro stabilizer. While rarely used to its full potential, it represented a design philosophy of shoot first, move fast. The battle proved that the era of the land battleship, the slow, heavy, invincible tank, was over. The future belonged to the main battle tank concept, a vehicle that balanced mobility, firepower, and reliability. The Soviets, watching the German defeat, took note. They realized that their own T-34 seconds, while revolutionary in 1941, were reaching a dead end. The defeat of the German armor in the Bulge forced the Soviets to accelerate the development of the T-54 and T-55 tanks, moving away from crude mass towards the integrated systems the Americans were demonstrating. The invisible web, the SCR-300. Finally, we return to the mystery. How did Patton move an army in 48 hours? The German generals communicated via telephone lines, which were cut by resistance fighters, and Enigma-encrypted Morse code, which was slow and intercepted by Ultra. Patton communicated by voice. The American army in the Bulge was the first fully radio-integrated force in history. The hero of this logistics miracle was the SCR-300 backpack radio, the walkie-talkie. Unlike German radios, which used amplitude modulation, AM, and were filled with static and interference, The American radios used frequency modulation, FM. FM radio was clear. It was unaffected by the static of storms or engine noise. This allowed American commanders to decentralize command. A sergeant in a foxhole could talk to a tank commander, who could talk to an artillery battery, who could talk to a P-47 pilot circling overhead. When Patton turned his army north, he didn't need to write thousands of paper orders. He used a radio network that reacted at the speed of speech. The Germans were fighting a centralized, top-down war from a bunker in Berlin. The Americans were fighting a decentralized, network-centric war. The Battle of the Bulge was not just Hitler's last stand. It was the dress rehearsal for World War III. When the Soviet military analysts studied the battle in the years that followed, they were not impressed by the American courage they expected that. They were terrified by the American systems. They saw that the United States could deploy electronic proximity fuses, VT fuses, that rendered infantry attacks suicidal, move entire armies across unpaved terrain in winter using a trucking fleet, logistics, that outnumbered the entire German inventory, coordinate air, ground and artillery fire in real time using FM radio networks. The Soviets realized that the T-34 strategy, building thousands of simple tanks and rushing them forward, would be wiped out by American technology. This realization drove the Soviet Union into the high-tech arms race. It forced them to steal the plans for the atomic bomb. It forced them to develop their own guided missiles. The snows of the Ardennes melted in the spring of 1945, revealing the rusted hulks of king tigers and panthers dinosaurs that had gone extinct because they couldn't adapt to a new climate. The climate was no longer about steel and gunpowder. It was about silicon, electrons and gasoline. The Battle of the Bulge proved that in the modern age, the side with the best kill chain, from detection to logistics to impact, wins. The Americans didn't just beat the Germans. They rendered the entire concept of the Wehrmacht obsolete. And as the Iron Curtain fell 2 years later, the lessons of the Bulge became the doctrine of NATO. Don't fight fair. Fight with physics.